My name is Ryan, and I'm 33 years old. I still remember the exact sound of the lock turning on my 18th birthday, as if someone had closed not just a door, but an entire chapter of my life. My parents stood inside the house, arms crossed, while I stood outside with nothing but a duffel bag of clothes and a set of car keys. My mom said flatly, "You're an adult now? You're on your own." My dad added, almost like it was a punchline to a joke, "Consider it a lesson in life." Then the door shut. The lights inside flickered off. I was left staring at my own reflection in the darkened window of the home I'd grown up in, the home that suddenly wasn't mine anymore. I tried to laugh it off at first, convincing myself that maybe they were bluffing, that it was some twisted test of independence. But when I came back the next morning, knocking on the door with a mixture of hope and anger, no one answered. The locks had been changed. The garage door code didn't work anymore. My phone buzzed with a single text from my mother. "We told you. Good luck." That was it. No explanation, no guidance, no safety net. Just a void where my family used to be. I spent the next months sleeping in the back seat of my beat-up car. It wasn't much, just an old sedan that rattled every time I turned the key, but it was the only shelter I had. Nights were the hardest. I would lie awake, staring up through the smudged windshield at the sky, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with my parents, trying to pinpoint when I became so disposable to them. I'd ask myself if I had missed some sign, some clue that they'd been planning this. But the truth was, they had always been cold, always quick to remind me that I wasn't the golden child. That was my sister, Emily, the one who followed every rule, got straight A's, and never questioned their authority. Meanwhile, I was the kid who liked drawing, who skipped football practice, who dreamed of moving to the city and doing something different. In their eyes, I was a disappointment waiting to happen. And on my 18th birthday, they decided to cut their losses. During those car-sleeping months, I cycled through every possible emotion. At first, there was anger, a raw, searing anger that made me want to storm back into the house and scream at them until they understood what they'd done. But that anger eventually collapsed into despair. I would sit in the driver's seat with the keys dangling in my hands, feeling the weight of their words pressing down on me. "You're on your own now." It wasn't just a sentence, it was a life sentence. Yet somewhere in that darkness, I found a small ember of determination. If they thought I couldn't make it, then I had no choice but to prove them wrong. The first job I picked up was at a gas station, working the overnight shift. It wasn't glamorous. I stocked shelves, cleaned bathrooms, and swept floors at 3 a.m. while the rest of the world slept, but it gave me a paycheck. I showered in the grimy employee bathroom and bought dollar burgers from the drive-thru down the road. Every night, I told myself it was temporary, that if I just kept moving forward, things would change. Slowly, that ember of determination grew into something steadier. I started saving money, little by little, until I could rent a tiny studio apartment. It wasn't much bigger than my car, but it had 4 walls, a bed, and a door that I could lock from the inside. For the first time, I didn't feel like the world could push me out. But the distance between me and my parents wasn't just physical. It became emotional, too. I stopped calling, stopped checking if maybe they had softened. I convinced myself they didn't exist, that family was a concept I had to build from scratch on my own. I worked harder than I ever thought I could. First at that gas station, then at a diner, then finally landing a job at a construction company where I learned the ropes and proved myself. With every paycheck, with every small step forward, I could almost hear my parents' voices in the back of my mind, mocking me, doubting me. And every single time, I used that memory as fuel. Now, sitting here at 33, I look around at the life I've built, the home I own, the business I've started, the circle of friends who feel more like family than my own blood ever did. And I can't help but feel both pride and disbelief. I made it. I survived what should have broken me. And yet, life has a strange sense of humor. Because just when I thought I had left the past behind, my parents showed up at my door. It was a Tuesday evening when I heard the knock. A steady, almost hesitant knock that didn't match the delivery drivers or neighbors I was used to. When I opened the door, there they were. My father looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders hunched, his face lined with worry. My mother clutched her purse like it was the only thing tethering her to the ground. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, that some cruel twist of memory had conjured them up. But then my mother spoke, her voice trembling. "Ryan," she said, "we need your help." And that's when the old wounds I thought had healed suddenly began to ache again. I stood frozen in the doorway, the same doorway where I had greeted clients, friends, and neighbors with warmth countless times. But this wasn't the same. My father's eyes flicked around, not meeting mine, as if he was taking inventory of the house, the hardwood floors, the art on the walls, the simple but tasteful furniture I'd chosen. My mother, on the other hand, looked directly at me. She had the same sharp eyes I remembered, the same ones that used to narrow whenever she compared me to my sister. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Then she let out a sigh that was half pleading, half expectant. "Ryan, can we come in?" she asked. I hesitated, every instinct in me screaming no. I thought of all those nights in my car, shivering under a thin blanket, while behind the walls of their warm house they slept soundly without a thought for me. Still, something inside me, maybe politeness, maybe curiosity, shifted my weight to the side. "Fine," I said and stepped back. They entered like strangers, glancing around at a life they hadn't built, a life they had bet against. My dad cleared his throat. "You've done well for yourself," he muttered, like it was an accusation instead of a compliment. My mother nodded in agreement, but I could see the way her lips tightened. It wasn't pride. It was calculation. We sat down in the living room, and I waited. Finally, my mother broke the silence. "It's Emily," she said. "She's going through a difficult time." There it was. The name. My sister. The golden child. I leaned back in my chair, already bracing myself. "She's had some setbacks," my mother continued. "Her husband left, and she's struggling financially. She's not doing well emotionally either. We thought, well, you've done so well, Ryan. Maybe you could help her get back on her feet." I stared at them, trying to process the audacity. 15 years of silence, 15 years of pretending I didn't exist, and now here they were, not to apologize, not to reconnect, but to ask me to bail out the daughter they had chosen over me every single time. "What exactly are you asking?" I said slowly. My father finally spoke up. His tone was firm, as if this was already decided. "We were hoping you could lend her some money. A substantial amount. Enough so she can keep her house, maybe start over. She's your sister, after all." I laughed, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "You locked me out on my 18th birthday, told me I was on my own, and now you want me to save Emily?" My mother frowned, as if I was being unreasonable. "That was years ago. We wanted you to learn responsibility. And look, it worked. You're successful now, aren't you? We gave you the push you needed." Her words hit me like ice water. She was rewriting history right in front of me. In her version, abandoning me wasn't cruelty. It was some kind of twisted gift. I leaned forward, my hands gripping my knees. "You didn't give me a push. You left me with nothing. I slept in my car. I scrubbed gas station floors at 3 in the morning. I built this life without you." My dad waved a hand dismissively. "The past is the past. Emily needs you now. We always knew you were stronger, that you could handle yourself. That's why we focused more on her. She was fragile. You were resilient." I could feel the old anger rising, the same anger that had kept me awake so many nights in that car. Resilient. That was their excuse. That I could handle being thrown away, while Emily got every ounce of care and comfort. And what about me? I asked quietly. Who was there for me when I needed help? My mother's eyes flickered, but she didn't answer. Instead, she said, "Ryan, don't be selfish. She's your family. She needs you." The word selfish stung. Selfish, after all I had endured, all I had clawed my way through. Selfish, because I wasn't eager to hand over the stability I had bled for. I thought back to birthdays spent alone, to holidays where no one called, to the countless times I had been reminded I was the expendable one. And now, after all that, they dared to sit in my living room and make me feel guilty for not opening my wallet. They weren't here for me. They weren't even here because they wanted to see me. They were here because Emily, the golden child, had fallen from her pedestal, and they needed someone to prop her back up. And in their minds, who better than the son they had once tossed aside like garbage? But as my mother's voice grew sharper, as my father's eyes grew more insistent, I realized something else. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. They wanted to reestablish the same dynamic as before. Me, the one who gives, who bends, who sacrifices, and Emily, the one who receives. The roles hadn't changed at all, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if I wanted to play along. My father leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and lowered his voice like he was about to share something confidential. "Ryan," he said, "this isn't just about helping your sister. It's about doing what's right for the family. You've done well, and it's only fair that you share some of that with the people who raised you." I almost laughed at the word raised. Raised implied care, guidance, support. What they had done was closer to abandonment wrapped in a neat package of self-righteousness. But before I could respond, my mother reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of papers. She slid them across the coffee table toward me. "What's this?" I asked, though my chest was already tightening. "It's a loan agreement," she said smoothly. "We thought it would be easier for you to help Emily this way. We've already spoken to the bank. Well, technically we used your name, since you have better credit now. The loan's been approved. All you have to do is sign." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My hands trembled as I picked up the papers and scanned the lines. Sure enough, my name was printed neatly across the top. The bank, the terms, the repayment schedule, everything had been set up without my knowledge. My parents hadn't just come to ask for help. They had already decided to entangle me in this mess, assuming I would have no choice but to agree. My voice cracked as I asked, You used my name?" My father nodded like it was the most natural thing in the world. "We had to. Emily doesn't qualify, and you're in a much better position than she is. It's really no big deal. Just sign it, and she'll get the money she needs. You won't even feel it." The room tilted for a moment, my pulse thundering in my ears. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This wasn't just asking for help. This was betrayal on a level I hadn't imagined. They hadn't respected me enough to even ask first. They had gambled with my name, my reputation, my future, like it was theirs to control. "I can't believe this," I whispered. My mother's tone hardened, her mask of politeness slipping. "Ryan, stop being dramatic. We wouldn't even be here if it weren't urgent. Emily's going to lose her house. Do you really want your sister living on the streets? Is that what kind of man you've become?" I looked at her, stunned. "Do you even hear yourself? You're guilt tripping me into signing away my life because Emily messed up hers. You didn't care when I was sleeping in my car. You didn't care when I had nothing. But suddenly, when Emily's in trouble, you're desperate. She's your sister." My father snapped, his voice rising for the first time that night. "She deserves better. She's always been the one who carried this family's name with pride. You were reckless, always running off with your little ideas and dreams. If we had to choose who to support, of course it was her. And now that you're in a position to help, you're acting like a stranger." The words cut deeper than I expected. Even after all these years, hearing him admit so plainly that I had always been the expendable one twisted something inside me. All those times I had wondered if maybe I was imagining it, if maybe I just wasn't trying hard enough to win their approval. Those doubts shattered in an instant. They hadn't even seen me as worth investing in. I pushed the papers back toward them, my hands shaking. "No, I'm not signing this." My mother's face hardened. She leaned forward, her voice low but dripping with venom. "You think you're better than us now, don't you? Sitting in this nice house, pretending you built everything on your own. Don't forget where you came from, Ryan. Without us, you'd be nothing." The irony was almost laughable. Without them, I had been nothing. And that nothing had taught me to fight for everything I had now. But the betrayal sitting in front of me, the realization that even after 15 years, they hadn't changed, was almost too much to take in. And then, as if twisting the knife, my mother added, "If you won't do it for Emily, think of us. We've already tied our names to this loan. If you refuse, it'll look bad for the family. Do you want us to suffer? After all we've done for you. All they'd done for me." The words echoed in my mind, heavy with bitterness. They weren't just asking for help anymore. They were threatening me with shame, with reputation, with the idea of family that they had never once extended to me. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I realized there was no going back, no reconciliation, no quiet forgiveness waiting at the end of this story. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady now, almost calm. "So that's it. You come into my home, you use my name without asking, you demand I take on debt for Emily, and you think I'll just roll over like before." My father's jaw tightened. My mother's eyes narrowed. The silence between us grew heavier, like a storm building just before it breaks. And that's when I knew. This wasn't just about helping Emily. This was about showing them I wasn't the same broken kid they had left on the porch 15 years ago. The silence that followed my refusal was thick enough to choke on. My father's hand clenched into a fist on the armrest, his knuckles whitening. My mother leaned back, crossing her arms, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. For a moment, I wondered if they were going to shout, storm out, or even threaten something worse. But instead, my mother let out a long, tired sigh and said, "You'll regret this, Ryan. Family is everything. And when you turn your back on family, you turn your back on yourself." The words lingered in the air even after they left. They gathered their things, standing stiffly, and without another word, walked out of my house. I didn't follow them. I didn't even watch from the window. I sat in my chair long after the sound of their car had faded into the night, staring at the unsigned loan papers still lying on the table. For the first time in years, I felt like I was back in that car again. 18, alone, staring at the roof of my sedan while the cold crept into my bones. I thought I had outrun that version of myself, buried him under layers of success and independence. But now, with a few words and a stack of papers, my parents had managed to drag me right back into that old wound. The following days were heavy. I couldn't focus at work, my mind looping endlessly around what had happened. I kept asking myself questions I couldn't answer. Was I heartless for refusing? Was I selfish for not helping Emily? Was I really as cold as they claimed? Their voices played in my head like a cruel chorus. "You're selfish. You'll regret this. Without us, you'd be nothing." I tried to shake it off, but the weight clung to me. Nights were the worst again. I'd sit awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling that same ache of isolation I thought I had left behind. For years I had told myself their rejection didn't matter, that I was stronger without them. But their sudden reappearance, their demands, and that betrayal with the loan, those cracks in my armor widened faster than I expected. One morning, I found myself parked outside the old gas station where I'd worked all those years ago. I hadn't been there in a decade. The place hadn't changed much. The same faded sign, the same smell of fuel lingering in the air. I sat there in my car, gripping the steering wheel, remembering those long nights mopping floors and wondering if I'd ever make it out. It hit me then how close I had come to giving up back then, how fragile I had been beneath all that resilience my parents claimed I had. I realized that their betrayal hadn't just hurt. It had reopened scars I wasn't sure had ever fully healed. But underneath that pain, something else began to stir. A quieter voice. One that reminded me that I had survived once before, and I could survive this too. I didn't have to let them define me again. I didn't have to play their game. That night, I pulled the loan papers from the coffee table and read through them carefully, line by line. The more I read, the angrier I became. They had really gone this far, used my name, my credit, my reputation, without even asking. It wasn't just manipulation. It bordered on fraud. My parents weren't just asking for help. They were willing to risk destroying me to save Emily. I sat back, staring at the papers, my chest rising and falling slowly. The anger hadn't burned out yet, but it was shifting, hardening into something colder, something sharper. For the first time since that knock on my door, I started to think not about what they had done to me, but about what I could do in response. The thought scared me a little, if I'm honest. It felt dangerous, like stepping onto a path I couldn't turn back from. But it also felt necessary. If they were willing to gamble with my life for Emily's sake, then maybe it was time they finally learned what it felt like to be powerless. But I wasn't ready yet. Not fully. For now, I needed space. I needed to breathe. I needed to remind myself that I wasn't that scared 18-year-old kid anymore. So, I quietly folded the loan papers, slipped them into a drawer, and began to plan. The drawer with the loan papers became both a weight and a reminder. Every time I walked past it, I felt that simmering anger, but I also felt clarity. I had survived their abandonment. I had built a life from nothing, and now they had proven that nothing about them had changed. If I wanted to rise, it wasn't going to be for their approval. It was going to be for me. The weeks after their visit, I threw myself into work. I ran a contracting business by then, something I had started small, but had been growing steadily for years. We specialized in renovations and custom builds, and while business had always been good, I found myself more focused, more driven than ever. Every new project, every satisfied client, every check I signed for my employees, it all became part of a bigger picture. Success, I realized, wasn't just about money. It was about control. Control over my own life, my future, and most importantly, over the narrative that my parents had tried to write for me. Opportunities began to line up in ways they never had before. A developer I had done work for introduced me to a group of investors who were looking for someone to manage a series of commercial renovations. That contract alone doubled my company's annual revenue. Suddenly, I wasn't just a small business owner. I was building something that had reach, that had weight. With the extra income, I made changes in my personal life too. I upgraded my home, not out of vanity, but because I wanted a space that truly reflected what I had achieved. I traded in my old truck for a new one that I didn't have to pray over before every job. I even took my crew on a retreat as a thank you, watching their faces light up when they realized I valued them in a way my own parents had never valued me. Each step forward gave me more confidence, more leverage, and more distance from the boy who had once slept in his car. But it wasn't just financial growth. It was emotional growth too. I started opening up to people in ways I hadn't before. Friends became like family, the kind that showed up not because they wanted something, but because they cared. I even began mentoring a couple of younger guys in the trade, kids who reminded me of myself at 18, lost, unsure, written off by everyone around them. I told them the things I wished someone had told me back then. That resilience doesn't mean you deserve abandonment, and that success is never about proving someone else wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And yet, in the back of my mind, I knew my parents hadn't gone away. They had left my house empty-handed, but people like them didn't disappear quietly. They were waiting, watching, hoping I would cave, that I would eventually call and offer to help Emily. But with every new contract, every meeting with investors, every time I deposited another check into the business account, I felt stronger, more prepared. If they thought they could still pull strings on me, they were wrong. The shift became even clearer one night at a networking dinner. An investor introduced me as the man who built his business from scratch. The applause, the nods of respect, the handshake that followed. It all felt like validation I had never gotten from my parents. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. I didn't need their approval. I never had. But I also realized something else. Power wasn't just about protecting myself from them anymore. It was about positioning myself so that when they inevitably came back, and I knew they would, I'd be ready. Not as the boy who begged for scraps of affection, not as the man who quietly endured betrayal, but as someone who could finally look them in the eye and show them the cost of underestimating me. The rise wasn't just about building wealth. It was about building leverage. And deep down, I was beginning to sense that the moment to use it was getting closer. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to overhear. One afternoon, I stopped by a local supply yard to check on an order. As I was walking past the small office, I caught the tail end of a heated conversation, my mother's voice. I froze. She was standing outside, phone pressed to her ear, speaking with that sharp tone she always used when she was trying to sound in control. "No, I told you. We'll get the money. My son has more than enough. It's just a matter of convincing him. Emily cannot lose that house. Do you understand? If you foreclose, it will look bad for all of us." I ducked back behind a stack of pallets, my heart pounding. It hit me that this wasn't just about helping Emily out of some rough patch. She was on the brink of losing everything. And my parents weren't just worried about her. They were worried about appearances, about the family name. I waited until she left, then stepped into the office and casually asked the clerk who the woman had been. He shrugged and said, "Some lady arguing with the bank manager. Her daughter's mortgage is underwater." Not sure why she thought yelling would change that. The pieces began to click together in my mind. My parents hadn't just wanted me to help, they needed me to. Without my involvement, Emily was going to lose her home, and with it, the image they had spent decades protecting. The pedestal they'd always placed her on was cracking, and in their desperation, they had turned to the one person they once discarded. That realization was a turning point. For years, I had carried the weight of being the expendable one. But now, the roles had flipped. I wasn't the desperate one anymore. They were. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They didn't just want me, they depended on me. Independence, in the wrong hands, could be dangerous. Around that same time, an opportunity fell into my lap. The developer I had been working with offered me a chance to invest in a series of properties he was acquiring. It was risky, but the potential upside was huge. I ran the numbers, looked at the projections, and realized this was the moment I had been waiting for. If I played it right, not only could I grow my business, but I could secure a position of real influence in the community. I poured everything into the deal, late nights reviewing contracts, meetings with attorneys, careful negotiations with lenders. And when it finally closed, I found myself holding keys to properties that would generate steady income for years to come. I wasn't just running a contracting business anymore. I was becoming a landlord, an investor, a name that carried weight in circles my parents could only dream of entering. And that's when I started to think bigger. If Emily was truly at risk of losing her house, and if my parents were scrambling to maintain appearances, then there was an angle here, something I could use. But I didn't want to rush. Revenge done in anger is sloppy. Revenge done with patience is art. So I waited. I built my reputation quietly, letting word spread about my success. I attended community meetings, shook hands with city officials, even sponsored a local charity event. People began to look at me differently, not just as a contractor, but as someone who mattered. One evening, while reviewing paperwork, I noticed something interesting. One of the properties I now held partial ownership in was just a few blocks away from Emily's house. It wasn't much, an older building in need of renovation, but the proximity was poetic. Our lives had once been separated by choice. My parents had chosen her over me. But now, fate was bringing us into the same orbit again. I couldn't ignore the symbolism. The more information I gathered, the more the pieces lined up. Emily's mortgage wasn't just shaky, it was teetering on the edge. My parents' pleas weren't just emotional, they were born out of panic. And me? I was no longer powerless. I had resources, influence, and, most importantly, the truth on my side. The truth that they needed me far more than I would ever need them. I didn't know exactly how I would use it yet, but I knew one thing for certain. The day was coming when I would. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A few weeks after overhearing my mother's call, I received a formal letter in the mail, an invitation to a family meeting. It was written in my mother's handwriting, though she tried to make it sound official, almost businesslike. "We need to discuss Emily's situation," it read. "It's important that you attend." I almost tossed it in the trash, but something in me stirred. This wasn't just another attempt to guilt me. It was them laying their desperation bare. If they were going to summon me like some reluctant benefactor, then I would show up. On my terms. The meeting was held at Emily's house, a two-story colonial that still bore the shine of being the family jewel. My parents had always paraded it around as proof of her success. I pulled up in my new truck, parked deliberately at the front where they couldn't miss it, and walked up to the door with steady steps. Inside, the tension was immediate. Emily sat on the couch, her face pale, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. My father was pacing, his hands stuffed in his pockets. My mother sat rigidly, papers neatly stacked in front of her. They looked up as I entered, and for the first time in my life, I realized they were nervous. "Ryan," my mother said, forcing a smile. "Thank you for coming." I sat across from them, deliberately calm, and folded my hands in my lap. "You said it was important. So here I am." My father cleared his throat. "We've spoken with the bank. They're prepared to move forward with foreclosure unless we intervene. Emily needs immediate financial support. We were hoping you'd reconsider the loan." I leaned back, studying their faces. "You mean the loan you already tried to take out in my name?" My mother bristled. "We only did that because time was short. You should understand, Ryan, family sometimes requires sacrifice." I let the silence stretch, long enough that Emily shifted uncomfortably. Finally, I said, "You're right. Family does require sacrifice. I know that better than anyone." They exchanged hopeful glances, misinterpreting my calm. My father leaned forward. "So you'll help?" That's when I placed a folder on the table. Inside were copies of property deeds, financial statements, and business contracts, all tied to the new investments I had secured. My mother's eyes darted over the documents, confusion flickering across her face. "What's this?" she asked. "This," I said evenly, "is proof that I've built something real, something strong, something that doesn't need your approval. And it just so happens," I added, tapping one of the deeds, "that I now have influence in this community, more than you realize." My father frowned. "What does that have to do with Emily?" I looked directly at my sister. Her eyes were wide, a mix of fear and shame. "It means that when the bank decides what to do about your mortgage, whose voice do you think they'll listen to? The family that burned every bridge they ever had, or the man who now does business with their partners?" The room went silent. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. My father stopped pacing, his face flushed. Emily looked down at her hands, trembling. I continued, my voice calm but firm. For 15 years, I was nothing to you. Disposable. A mistake. And now, suddenly, I'm the solution to all your problems. But here's the truth. You don't get to rewrite history. You don't get to decide when I matter. My mother finally found her voice. Ryan, you can't mean to let your sister lose everything. That would be cruel. Cruel? I repeated, almost laughing. Cruel was turning an 18-year-old out into the cold without a second thought. Cruel was watching me sleep in my car while you celebrated holidays without me. Cruel was using my name to secure a loan behind my back. I leaned in, lowering my voice to a near whisper. No, cruel would be me pretending this is my problem to solve. Cruel would be giving you exactly what you want and letting you think you still have power over me. Their faces were pale now, the weight of my words settling in. I stood, tucking the folder back under my arm. I came here to show you one thing, I said. You don't hold the cards anymore. I do. And I won't be signing anything for you. I walked toward the door, their voices calling after me, pleading, bargaining, even threatening, but I didn't turn back. With each step, I felt lighter, stronger, more certain that I had finally broken free of their hold. But as I reached my truck, a thought crossed my mind. Maybe simply saying no wasn't enough. Maybe the real revenge wasn't just in refusing their demands. It was in letting them feel the slow, inevitable crumble of the world they had built on favoritism and lies. And for the first time, I started to plan not just how to protect myself, but how to make sure they finally understood the cost of underestimating me. I didn't hear from them for a few weeks after the meeting. The silence was almost surreal, like standing in the eye of a storm that had finally passed. But storms have a way of circling back, and this one did. It started with whispers around town, at the supply yard, at the diner, even during a city council meeting I attended. People mentioned Emily's name with pity. Word had spread fast. Her house was officially in foreclosure. She had 30 days to vacate. I didn't gloat when I heard it, but I won't lie. It stirred something inside me. Not joy, exactly, but a sense of inevitability. The pedestal my parents had built for her was crumbling in full view of everyone who used to admire it. A week later, I saw them again. I was walking out of the bank after finalizing paperwork for a new investment property when I spotted my parents and Emily in the lobby. They looked like shadows of themselves, tired, frayed, the confident edge gone from their voices. My father muttered something to the teller, who shook her head with professional sympathy. My mother clutched a stack of documents like they might disappear if she let go. Emily stood behind them, eyes downcast, avoiding everyone's gaze. They noticed me. For a second, hope flickered in their faces. My mother even started toward me, lips parting like she was about to say my name. But I didn't stop. I walked past them, my stride steady, my head high. As the glass doors closed behind me, I caught a glimpse of them through the reflection. 3 figures left standing in a building where they no longer had leverage, watching the son they had once discarded move forward without them. The fallout grew worse for them in the weeks that followed. Emily's house was auctioned off, the bank repossessed her car, and the perfect daughter image shattered beyond repair. My parents' friends, the same people they had always bragged to about Emily's accomplishments, started keeping their distance. The invitations to social gatherings dried up. Their pride, which had always been their shield, turned into their greatest liability. Meanwhile, my life kept climbing. The properties I had invested in turned profitable quicker than expected, and my company landed 2 new contracts that cemented my reputation even further. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving on a level my parents could never ignore, even from the sidelines. One evening, I returned home from work to find a letter in my mailbox. The handwriting was shaky, but familiar. My mother. Inside, she wrote a single page, filled with apologies that felt more desperate than sincere. At the end, she wrote, "Please, Ryan, don't let us fade from your life completely. We're still your parents." I set the letter down on the table and stared at it for a long time. A part of me, the boy who once longed for their love, felt the pull to forgive. But forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. And forgetting would mean erasing the nights in the car, the years of silence, the betrayal with the loan papers. So I didn't reply. I folded the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and placed it in the same drawer where I had once kept the fraudulent loan documents. A reminder, not of pain, but of clarity. Family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by loyalty, by love, by the people who stand by you when you have nothing to offer. My parents had made their choice 15 years ago. I was simply living with the consequences, and so were they. As I sat back in my chair that night, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Closure. Not because I had hurt them, but because I had finally freed myself from their hold. The final line they had given me at 18 echoed in my mind. You're on your own now. And for the first time, I smiled, because it was true. I was on my own, and I was better for it.